Okay, before we proceed, any other questions that you want to ask? If you want to ask anything regarding the material that we have covered so far. Okay, so if no question, then I will continue with our lectures for today's session. Okay, so for this chapter, we're going to look at what it means by correlation and regression. So basically, apa yang kita akan lihat kat sini adalah apa yang dimaksudkan dengan korelasi dan apa yang dimaksudkan dengan regresi, dan apa perbezaannya antara korelasi dan juga regresi. So in our case, in this in this syllabus, we are just only looking at a bivariate situation whereby we only deal with two variables. Okay, we only deal with two variables, and in specific, we only deal with one independent, what we call as independent variables, and one dependent variables. Okay. However, when we talk about correlation, we are not talking about the independent variable or dependent variable yet. However, since this in our syllabus, the continuation is through correlation and then it will continue with regression, it is best for us to identify the independent variable and the dependent variable from start. Okay, daripada awal, so kita identify dulu apa yang dimaksudkan dengan independent variable dengan dependent variable. So the objective of this chapter is that we're going to look at what it means by correlation. Okay, first, but at the end of the chapter, students should be able to understand what it means by correlation and what are the characteristic of a correlated values. So what are the values, what does negative value means, what does positive value means, and what does zero means. And also in terms of a scatter diagram, you're going to look at how are you going to draw a scatter diagram, and how are you going to interpret the scatter diagram and see the association between two variables. Okay, and then and some other things. All right, and also we will continue with the regression. From correlation, we will continue with regression, whereby we not only looking at the association between two variables, but also looking at whether one variable affect the other or not. Okay, whether one variable influence the other variable or not. So that is what we're going to look at under regression. And in our syllabus, we only deal with what we call as a simple linear regression, where we only have two variables. One is the independent variables and the other one is the dependent variables. Okay, so without wasting any more time, let's just continue with our first information on what it means by correlation. Okay, correlation analysis is a statistical method used to measure the strength and direction of the relationship between two variables. So bila kita katakan kat sini, apa yang dimaksudkan di sini adalah apabila kita melihat dari segi analisis korelasi, analisis korelasi hanya melihat sama ada terdapat perkaitan ataupun tidak antara dua pemboleh ubah. Dan dalam keadaan di sini kita lihat pemboleh ubah yang berbentuk continuous. We are only looking at a numerical data. So when we talk about correlation in the syllabus at the moment, we only deal with numerical data. Of course, there are other ways to look at correlation for a non-numerical data. However, this method has been removed from our syllabus. The method is called the Spearman rank correlation coefficient. So if you look through your textbooks and you see that there is a discussion on Spearman rank correlation coefficient, you can just discard that information. You can just ignore the information because it's already not in our syllabus anymore. Okay, but for the numerical measures, it's still there. All right. So basically, when we talk about correlation, we are only looking at the association between two variables. It doesn't matter whether which one is independent and which one is dependent variable in this situation. However, since the data that we use for the correlation analysis will also be used for the regression analysis, it is wise for us to identify the independent variable and the dependent variable at the earlier stage. Okay, nanti saya akan tunjukkan apa yang dimaksudkan dengan independent, apa yang dimaksudkan dengan dependent variables. And then once we have already identified the correlation between two variables, we can further analyze this data for the effect of one variable with the other. So kita nak tengok adakah salah satu variable tersebut mempengaruhi variable yang satu lagi ataupun tidak. So this process is called the regression analysis. Okay, sebab tu kita tengok kat sini dari segi correlation analysis dengan regression analysis, there is a what we call a continuity in term of the process of identifying the two variables. Okay, so first kita tengok dari segi dia punya kekuatan, dia punya perhubungan, sama ada wujud ataupun tidak perhubungan antara dua pemboleh ubah tersebut, dan sekiranya wujud, apakah jenis perhubungan yang ada di antara dua pemboleh ubah tersebut. Dan on top of that, kita go further on analysis untuk melihat adakah salah satu daripada pemboleh ubah tersebut mempengaruhi pemboleh ubah yang satu lagi. Nah, itu dari segi analysis, regression analysis. Okay, itu yang kita nak bincangkan dalam topik yang ketiga ni. So unit 3 ataupun chapter 3 here, the correlation and simple linear regression. Okay, the first thing that you need to do normally when we have a data set is to get some idea from the data itself and see whether there exists any relationship between the bivariate variable. So in this case, we only looking at bivariate, meaning to say that kita hanya melihat dua data pada satu masa. Okay, dua pemboleh ubah pada satu masa. So itu yang dipanggil sebagai bivariate. Bi itu maksudnya dua. Okay. So one way to look at the relationship is through the graphical display, and this we call the scatter plot. Kita panggil dia sebagai scatter plot. We call this as scatter plot. So normally we use what we call as scatter plot. Okay, scatter plot ataupun scatter diagram. So this is just simply a two-way or two-dimensional graphical display showing the existence if any between two variables. Okay, between two variables, i.e. in this situation, in this case we are looking at whether the independent and dependent variables. Okay, so this is basically what we are looking at in terms of a scatter plot. So itu yang kita nak lihat dalam satu-satu scatter plot. So we're gonna have this kind of situation, right? So in general, when we talk about scatter plot, so it's just simply two-dimensional graphical display. So in this case, when we talk about two-dimensional graphical display, kita ada paksi X dengan paksi Y, ataupun we have the horizontal axis and the vertical axis, where the horizontal axis normally represent the independent variables and the vertical axis represent the dependent variable. And in general, biasanya kita denote this independent and dependent variable with the notation X and Y. Okay, X refers to the independent variable, meanwhile Y is referring to the dependent variables. Okay, when we talk about the relationship between these two variables, okay, kita tengok dari segi dia punya perkaitan antara dua pemboleh ubah ni, kita mungkin akan dapat lihat apakah jenis perkaitan yang akan wujud antara dua pemboleh ubah ni. Okay, there are several things that you need to understand. So in this case, sometimes if you see that when you draw a scatter plot, the data is lie on a straight line. Okay, kesemua data-data yang ada berada dalam satu garis lurus. Okay, bila berada dalam satu garis lurus, kita katakan dia sebagai perfect correlation. And when we talk about perfect correlation, okay, when we talk about perfect correlation, it either can be a perfect positive correlation or a perfect negative correlation, something like this. Okay. So in this situation, you can see that dalam satu-satu gambar rajah scatter diagram ataupun scatter plot, there are two things yang you boleh dapatkan. Okay, yang pertama, you boleh dapatkan dia punya direction. Okay, dia punya direction sama ada it is positive or negatively related. Okay, sama ada positif ataupun negatively related. Yang kedua, kita boleh lihat dari segi dia punya kekuatan, dia punya strength. Okay, dia punya strength. How do you know the strength? If the data is clustered close to one another into a straight line. Okay, kalau dia menghampiri satu garis lurus, okay, dengan lebih dekat dengan satu sama lain, dia punya cluster tu semakin kecil, maka kita katakan bahawa kekuatan dia semakin meningkat. Contohnya kat sini, kalau diperhatikan data-data itu berada di atas satu garisan lurus. Sebab tu kita katakan dia punya kekuatan sangat kuat, iaitu perfect correlation. We need to say that if one variable increases in value, the second variable will definitely increases in value. Okay, dia takkan ada perubahan kat situ. Okay, kalau satu naik, satu tu pasti akan naik. So dia ada kepastian kat situ. Alright, so that is in term of the characteristic of a scatter diagram. So basically, dalam sesuatu scatter diagram ataupun scatter plot, kita boleh dapatkan dua benda. Okay, kita boleh dapatkan dua perkara. So perkara yang pertama yang kita boleh dapatkan adalah dia punya kekuatan. Okay, dan perkara yang kedua adalah dia punya direction, dia punya arah. Adakah dia punya kekuatan tu berhubung secara positif ataupun berhubung secara negatif. Okay, apa yang dimaksudkan dengan positif dan negatif correlated ni? Okay, apa yang dimaksudkan dengan positif dengan negatif? So kalau kita nak katakan positif, so bila katakan positif, kita tengok yang positif dulu. Okay, when we talk about positive correlation, if it is positive correlated, okay, this means that if value of x increases, then value of y also increases. So in this case, we call this a direct relationship. Okay, so that means one goes up, the other one also goes up. Okay, so we have the direct relationship. So one goes up, the other one also goes up. So this is whenever you have a positive correlated something like this. The slope is positively sloped. Okay. Meanwhile, for a negative correlation, okay, for this case, negative correlated, negative. Okay, what it says here, when the value of x increases, then the value of y decreases. So in other words, in this case, we call this as a inverse relationship. Okay, inverse relationship. Okay, so we have this as an inverse relationship. Okay, so we have this as inverse relationship. Alright, and then the other one we have this is in terms of its direction, so positive dengan negative. The other one is in the form of its strength. The closer the values or the data that cluster into a straight line, the smaller the cluster into a straight line, the stronger the relationship. Okay, so the smaller the cluster, the stronger the relationship. Right, so kita akan tengok contoh lah kemudian. So these are the two example of a correlation where we have the two, both are perfect correlation. The only difference is that one is positive, the other one is negative. Okay, the inverse and the direct. So if the data is scattered, okay, is scattered, there is no certain pattern of, you can draw a straight line crossing the, there is a unique straight line crossing the data, so then we call this as no correlation. So when we talk about no correlation, it means that the data is scattered around. Okay, there's no specific pattern that it shows that whether the data is clustered together into a straight line increasingly or decreasingly. Okay, so this is the scatter diagram for no correlation. Okay, this is also the scatter diagram for a positive linear correlation. Okay, you can see that it's not perfect because it's not lie on the straight line, but it is cluster close to a straight line. So dia punya cluster. So ini yang dipanggilkan sebagai cluster ni. So inilah yang dipanggilkan sebagai cluster. So we have all these things. So this is the cluster. So that means the smaller the cluster itself, so that means the steeper this cluster itself, ataupun semakin kecil cluster tu, dia punya lebar tu semakin kecil, maka kekuatan dia semakin meningkat. Okay, so in this situation you can say that the smaller the data set cluster around a straight line, the stronger the relationship between the two variables. Okay, this is the situation. Okay, apa yang dimaksudkan kat sini adalah semakin kecil cluster tersebut, semakin kuat dia punya kekuatan antara dua pemboleh ubah tersebut. Okay, so maknanya kalau katakan cluster ni kecil, maka kita berpati bahawa dia punya kekuatan tu semakin meningkat berbanding dengan cluster tu kalau dia semakin besar. And this also have its direction. This is a positive. If you have a positive slope, one increase, the other one also increase, that means you have a positive linear relationship. Okay, so that is the situation. Okay, any questions so far? Okay. Okay, so this is another example, a negative linear relationship, the same thing like just now, but right now different slope ataupun different direction. Tadi positif, yang ni negatif, dia akan jadi inverse relationship. Okay, this is a negative linear correlation, or we call this as inverse linear correlation. So inverse linear correlation boleh, negative linear correlation pun boleh, tapi yang selalu kita gunakan adalah negative linear correlation dengan positive linear correlation. Okay, the last two diagram here shows you a non-linear relationship. Kenapa kita katakan sebagai non-linear? Because in this situation you cannot draw a straight line to represent the whole data set. Okay, so kalau you nak draw the straight line memang tak dapat lah. So for example the first one, you cannot draw the straight line, so you tak boleh nak draw straight line macam ni. Tak boleh lah kan, so dia tak nampak tak apa, menarik kan. And then tak boleh lah you nak draw juga ni. So but if you divide this into two, you can draw a straight line something like this. One will be like this, the other one will be like this, right? Okay, another one will be like this. Okay, so you boleh buat macam tu, tapi this is not the, kita tak pecahkan pada dua kan. So you can see that if you want to draw a line crossing the data set, it will be in the form of nonlinear, which is it is in the form of a quadratic. Okay. Similarly, for the B, we have a non-linear relationship, but this one is not quadratic anymore, but it is exponential. Okay, it's not a straight line. Even though you can draw a straight line, but the accuracy is not there. Okay, so that is in terms of the non-linear relationship. Okay, so ini adalah beberapa example yang menunjukkan korelasi. So for example, in this case, the correlation between x and y is 0.892. So you can see that a correlation of +1 would arise only if all the points line up perfectly. So apa yang dimaksud kat sini? Kita akan dapat korelasi kosong sama dengan positive 1 ataupun positive ataupun negative 1 only when all the points line up perfectly on a straight line. Okay, maksudnya kalau semua data-data tu berada secara perfect, secara tepat, berada di atas satu garisan lurus, maka kita akan dapati bahawa nilai korelasinya adalah 1 ataupun perfect, ataupun negative 1, negatively perfect. Okay. Alright, so this is an example of 0.892. Okay, there is a note here. Stretching the diagram horizontally or vertically would change the perceived slope. So kita akan dapat lihat kalau katakan kita squeeze diagram ni. Okay, this is data manipulation, graphical manipulation. If you squeeze the graph, you can see that the slope change drastically, even if you widen the graph. So kalau you tengok dia punya slope tu dah berbeza kan, satu macam ni, okay, satu ni slope macam satu slope dia macam ni, satu lagi dah macam ni, dia makin landai kan. Okay, berbanding dengan yang asas macam ni lah. So this is yang asas. Okay, so if you squeeze, okay, if you squeeze or stretch the axis whether vertically or horizontally, it will change the slope of the relationship. However, it doesn't change the correlation value, the strength. Okay, the strength masih lagi kekal because the strength is calculated based on the how the data is clustered towards a one straight line. Okay, so dia tu tak berubah lah. So kita stretch ke, kita widen ke, kita widen ataupun kita kecilkan ke dia punya squeeze, dia punya horizontal axis pun dia takkan ubah dia punya kekuatan korelasi. Yang berubah hanyalah dia punya slope tu ya, dari segi diagram . Okay, this is the situation . So ini satu contoh. Okay, this is another example where you still have a positive relationship ataupun positive correlation. However, you can see that the correlation value right now is decreasing. Tadi 0.8 kan. So bila 0.8 tu dia dekat lah antara satu sama lain, betul tak? Okay, so macam ni . So in this case, kalau you perhatikan kat sini, so this is 0.56, this one is 0.892. You can see that this one has a smaller cluster because the data is close to one another as compared to this one which is having a lower correlation value for 0.561 only. Because you can see that the data is more scattered. It's not towards a straight line anymore macam tadi. Okay. So it says here a positive correlation signals that large value of one variable are typically associated with the large value of the other. Apa yang dimaksudkan kat sini adalah apabila kita katakan dia positive correlated, nilai independent variable yang tinggi akan mempunyai korelasi ataupun is associated, ada hubungan dengan nilai dependent variable yang juga tinggi. Itu yang dimaksudkan kat situ, signal that large value of one variable are typically associated with large value of the other. Okay. So however, kalau compare ni dengan yang sebelum ni, yang ni adalah kurang sikit dia punya kekuatan sebab ini hanya 0.561 sedangkan tadi 0.8 something, right? So that means yang tadi tu lebih kuat lah berbanding dengan yang ni . Okay, this is another example. A smaller value, then you can see that the data is more scattered compared to the previous one. And then this one is just an example showing that the negative relationship. Okay, so in this situation, kalau kita ada R ataupun kita ada slope bersama dengan negative, let's say you have negative 6.7 dengan satu lagi katakan we have negative 5.0. Okay, so which one has a greater relationship? So kalau kat sini kita tengok dia punya magnitude lah So kita just ignore dia punya signal, sign form, because the sign can only give you the direction whether it is positive or negative. Is it close to the one value that you have selected or farther away from the one value that you have, one variable that you have selected. So in this case, it's shown that the data is clustered together. That's why the correlation value is very high. Okay. Korelasi ini adalah agak tinggi. Okay, berbanding dengan yang ni, so yang ni pun masih lagi tinggi, 0.722 negatif. So that means it has a negative slope. Okay, dia mempunyai slope yang negatif. Alright. Okay, similarly for this one, you still have a negative slope. However, the strength has reduced from just now 0.722 and now it's only about 0.345. Okay, so you can compare this data. So you boleh tengok lah yang satu yang lebih sesuai. And then this is the individual random variable have a zero correlation. Yang ni tidak ada korelasi. So di sini lah bentuknya bila kita dapati nilai summation tu adalah bersamaan dengan 0.01 dengan variance 0 and then 01 pula. Betul lah. Okay, so in this case you perhatikan bahawa nilai dia adalah bersamaan dengan 0. So the correlation value is equal to 0. So if the value for the correlation is close to 0, that means the strength of the relationship depleted, okay, decreasing, okay, until it reaches 0. That means there is no relationship at all between the two variables. And in this situation, kita melihat dari segi linear relationship. Okay, kita tak discuss on non-linear relationship. Kita hanya tengok pada linear relationship sahaja. Okay, so that is another example. Okay, ini adalah example untuk yang non-linear. Okay, the correlation is 0, maksudnya does not imply interdependence. Indeed, correlation can completely miss non-linear relationship. So macam ni adalah non-linear relationship. So there is no way kita boleh lukiskan linear relationship. Okay. Okay, just now we can just look at the diagram. Kita boleh lihat dari segi diagram sahaja untuk menentukan sama ada perkaitan ataupun tidak. Another way is through the what we call as a measurement. So we can also use measures in order to detect whether there exists any relationship between the two variables. Okay, between the two variables. So what you can say here, we call this as linear correlation coefficient. It provides us with the measures to evaluate the strength of the relationship. Not only the strength of the relationship, but also the width of the relationship. Okay, so also the width of the relationship. Okay, there are two methods are commonly used for the linear correlation coefficient between two variables. One is called the Pearson product moment correlation coefficient. So simply we call this as PPMCC. Okay, is used to measure the strength of the relationship between two variables that are quantitative in nature. So in this sense, the Pearson product moment correlation coefficient is only used for the numerative values. Okay, hanya untuk numerative values. Okay, maksudnya yang numerical values dalam bentuk kuantitatif saja. Numerative numerical values ataupun quantitative values in nature. Okay, and then the second one we have what we call as the Spearman rank correlation coefficient. However, the second one here is no longer in our syllabus. So this one is not in syllabus anymore. Okay, not in syllabus anymore. So that is for the linear correlation coefficient. Okay, the Pearson product moment correlation coefficient is given by this formula. So you can use either one of this formula. Okay, you have the summation of xy multiply with summation of x summation of y divided by n and then divided by the whole thing. You can use either the first formula or the second formula. It doesn't matter. So boleh je guna dua-dua sekali. Okay. And then you have to know that the magnitude of the correlation is lies between -1 and 1. That is R is between -1 and 1.0. So in this situation, we use the symbol R to represent the sample correlation value. Okay, the sample correlation value. And this value goes from -1 to 1 inclusive of the values -1 and 1. So makna kata di sini adalah nilai korelasi ini adalah antara nilai -1 dan 1 termasuk nilai-nilai -1 dan 1 So kalau katakan dia mempunyai nilai menghampiri nilai 1 ataupun -1, if the R value is close to the right hand side, that is 1, or the left hand side in the real number system, -1, so we say that the relationship increases. Okay, so if it has a negative value, then we call this as a negative relationship, and if it has a positive value, we call it as the positive relationship. If the value that you obtain is equal to 0 or the mean is no longer equal to 0, so you have a value that is no relationship. Okay, kalau katakan dia mempunyai nilai R tu bersama dengan kosong, okay, ataupun menghampiri kosong, the tendency to be no relationship is getting higher. Okay, semakin maksud kata kat sini, semakin dia mendekati nilai R ni mendekati nilai kosong, maka kekuatan dia semakin lemah. Apabila nilai R ini mendekati nilai positif 1 dan negatif 1 di kedua-dua arah, maka kita katakan bahawa kekuatan dia semakin meningkat. The closer the value to +1 and -1, the stronger the relationship. Meanwhile, the closer the value of R towards the value of 0, indicate that the weaker the strength of the relationship, and maybe go until no relationship at all whenever you have the value of R equal to 0 or approximately 0. Okay, boleh So any questions so far? Boleh? So this is an example. So it says here, the marketing manager of ABC Trading Company believed that there is a relationship between the amount of mileage claims made by a salesman and their monthly sales. The table below shows the amount of sales and the mileage claim made by the salesman. Okay, in general here, if you look through the question itself, the table itself, the information itself, you can directly determine which one is a dependent variable and which one is the independent variable. Okay, before we go further, what is independent variable and what is the dependent variables? So in this situation, the independent variable is the variable that is given to you or you can use for prediction. Okay. So it is a non-values. So normally the independent variable is the non-values, and with the independent variable you will predict the dependent values, right? So of course in practical normally the data come in pairs. Okay, so for example in this case you have salesman A until G, and you have the mileage claim for salesman A until G, and also the sales for the salesman A until G. Okay, the intuition is like this. You can see that normally when you spend more time traveling, okay, when your mileage is larger, then your sales should be also larger. So it should be a direct relationship between the mileage claim with the sales amount. Okay, so maknanya kalau kita lebih banyak bergerak, sepatutnya kita dapat lebih banyak sales lah, daripada kita duduk setempat je kan, tak buat apa-apa, tak dapat apalah. Okay, so that is the situation. So in this case, the first question asks you to draw a scatter diagram for the above data, and then the second one asks you to find the product moment correlation coefficient between the amount sales and the mileage claim. So macam mana kita nak dapatkan dia punya scatter diagram? So in this case kita kena identify lah macam tadi. Identify, walaupun pada dasarnya kita tak perlu tahu pun kat bahagian ni yang mana satu independent, yang mana satu dependent variable. However, we have to do this in the beginning because normally the same question will be used for the regression analysis. So that means in regression analysis you have to identify correctly which one is independent and which one is dependent variables. Okay, tapi kat sini kita tak perlulah, tapi secara dasarnya sebab soalan ni akan digunakan juga untuk soalan-soalan yang sekitar tajuk regression. So kita kena tentukanlah yang mana satu independent, yang mana satu dependent variables. Okay, kat sini kita just identify the independent and dependent variable based on logic. So selalunya kalau kita claim lebih banyak, okay, kita punya mileage claim banyak, maknanya kita jalan dengan lebih banyak, seharusnya kita juga mendapat sales yang lebih tinggi. So that means in this case the amount of sales will depend on how many mileage claims made by a person, by a salesman. Okay, maksud kata kat sini, kalau ada salesman tu dia claim perjalanan mileage ataupun perbatuan dengan lebih tinggi berbanding dengan pekerja yang satu lagi, maka kita boleh dapati bahawa nilai sales dia juga akan meningkat. Okay, so a higher value of mileage claim is associated with the higher value of sales. Itu yang dimaksudkan. So nilai mileage claim yang tinggi akan berhubung baik dengan nilai sales bagi seseorang salesman. Okay, maksud kata kalau dia claim mileage tinggi, dia punya sales pun sepatutnya tinggi juga. Okay, positive correlation. So kita nak tengok betul tak benda ni daripada gambar rajah scatter diagram kita. So dengan kata lain kat sini, mileage claim tu akan jadi independent, manakala sales akan jadi dependent variables. So kita tengok bagaimana kita nak lukiskan gambar rajah dia. So di sini kita dapatkan gambar rajah dia macam ni. So you have the mileage claim, and then you have the sales. So you can see that there is an increasing trend, right? So the higher the mileage claim, the higher the sales. Baik, so that is the relationship. Okay, so this is the relationship between the mileage claim and sales based on the scatter diagram. And based on the scatter diagram itself, you can see that there is a positive relationship between the students and also the salesman. Alright, so that is the situation. And then for B, kita nak kira dia punya precision product moment correlation coefficient. So this is the traditional method whereby you have to calculate all the summation value. So you need to find the value of X, you need to find the value of Y, this is given, and then find the value of X square, Y square dan X times Y. So apa yang berlaku kat sini adalah kita darabkan je lah. Okay, and then at the end of the day kita just sum all the values. So nak buat apa dengan summation value ni? Masukkan dalam formula regression. So bila kita masukkan dalam formula regression, kita perhatikan bahawa nilai yang kita perolehi adalah 0.956. So very close with the value of positive 1. So this indicate that there exists a very strong positive linear relationship. Okay, very strong positive linear relationship between the sales and the mileage claim. Right, so that is the situation. So you boleh just gantikan saja dalam tu So yang ni bagaimana kita nak gantikan dalam penggunaan calculator dan semuanya. You all boleh refer kepada saya punya YouTube channel. Dalam tu dah ada saya masukkan bagaimana kita nak kira secara manual nilai Pearson product moment correlation coefficient. Right, so boleh watch my YouTube video. And then from here you can say that since the value of R is positive, so that means there is a positive linear relationship, and the value of R is 0.956, which is very high, higher than 0.9 and closer to 1, right? Positive 1. So that means it's very strong positive linear relationship between the two variables. Okay. If the mileage claim of a salesman is high, it is likely that the sale also will be high. Okay, itu adalah untuk Pearson product moment correlation coefficient. Any questions so far? So yang ni boleh try lah. Okay, and then ada juga soalan-soalan lain. Yang mana statement tu you all boleh discard saja daripada you all punya text. Okay, so ada soalan so far?